I invited my 3 tenants to a farewell party. They laughed, raised their glasses, and thanked me, but beneath their chairs I had hidden a recorder. Because one of them once ruined my husband, and now he doesn't even realize he's being tested one last time. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next chilling episodes we've got coming. It was 6:45 in the morning in Austin, Texas. The sky outside hadn't made up its mind, caught somewhere between the soft gray of dawn and the golden threat of another scorching day. Inside the aging clapboard house on Trinity Street, Clara Prescott, 71, moved with the kind of steadiness born not from strength, but from routine. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she poured hot water into the chipped ceramic teapot, the same one she'd used for 26 years, ever since her husband Martin died. The smell of bergamot filled the tiny kitchen. She didn't drink much of it anymore, just enough to say she had. The mug sat untouched on the oak table as Clara stood by the window watching the same street she'd watched for over 2 decades. Mailboxes with chipped paint, lawns in varying degrees of neglect, a boy on a skateboard weaving dangerously between trash bins. Nothing had changed, which is precisely why everything had to. She walked over to the writing desk by the window, its surface scratched from years of rent ledgers and birthday cards never sent. She opened the drawer and pulled out a sheet of thick ivory paper, her last piece of formal stationery. She smoothed it out, uncapped a fountain pen, and started to write. To my tenants, Vince, Rosa, and Malik, it has been a privilege to share this roof with you. But as all chapters end, so must this one. The house will be listed for sale next month. I'll be moving to live with my daughter Rebecca in San Antonio. I'd like to invite you all for dinner this Friday evening, a small farewell before we part ways. With gratitude, Clara Prescott. She sealed the letter with a piece of brittle wax tape and set it in 3 envelopes, one for each door at the end of the second-floor hallway. Each step she took creaked with the protest of old wood. She placed the envelopes gently beneath their doors like they might shatter. Downstairs again, she sat in the silence, staring at the empty chair across from her Martin's chair. No one had sat there in years, not because anyone was told not to, they just didn't, as if even time had chosen to respect its emptiness. By noon, the house had stirred to life. Rosa was the first to respond. She hovered near the kitchen doorway, her oversized paint-stained cardigan slung over one shoulder. "You're selling?" she asked without preamble, her voice low and smoky from years of tobacco and quiet resentment. Clara nodded. "Yes." "For good?" "Yes." Rosa blinked. "And just leaving. There's not much left here for me," Clara said, stirring her tea that had long gone cold. Rosa stared for a moment longer before retreating upstairs. Her footfalls faded unevenly, like she couldn't quite commit to climbing away. An hour later, Malik knocked once and walked in holding the envelope like it might explode. His backpack hung from one shoulder, filled with psych textbooks and half-written case notes. "You okay?" he asked. Clara gave him the softest smile she could manage. "I am." He sat down slowly. "You ever talk about your daughter before?" "Not often." Malik looked at the floor, rubbed the back of his neck. "You know, we kind of figured this place would always be here. Like, permanent." "I thought that too," Clara said. "But now," she looked him straight in the eye, "now I think permanence is a lie we tell ourselves so we don't have to deal with the truth." Malik nodded slowly, taking that in. "Still sucks." She placed a hand over his just for a moment. "Come to the dinner. Friday. One last meal." He nodded and left shoulders heavy. That night, Vince's response came last. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He just appeared leaning against the doorframe like he'd been rehearsing it. The envelope was unopened in his hand. "Is this a joke?" he asked. Clara didn't rise. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Vince stared at her with those sharp, accountant eyes that missed nothing, judged everything. He was in his early 50s, still wearing the same cheap cologne and navy button-ups he'd probably favored since 2003. There was something about him that had always felt rehearsed. "This house," he gestured broadly, "is a relic. You're its ghost." "Then it's time for the ghost to move on." Vince laughed once, dry and harsh. "You always said this place kept you alive." "It did." So why leave? Clara's tone hardened. Because now it's keeping me dead. They stared at each other for a moment, two people who knew how to play poker without cards. Vince cracked first. He sighed and rubbed his temples. Fine, I'll come. Free dinner and all. I'm not cooking for free, Clara said, her tone lighter than it had any right to be. You'll bring wine. He offered her a two-fingered salute and left muttering something under his breath that sounded like dramatic old bat, but she let it slide. He'd be there. That was enough. Friday came fast. Clara cleaned with a vengeance, not because it needed it, but because scrubbing the smell of old regret off the baseboards gave her something to do. She boiled the potatoes herself, sliced the roast with Martin's old knife. She folded cloth napkins and set the table for 4 with linen placements and a tarnished silver centerpiece. The chair across from her remained empty, not physically but spiritually. Martin would sit there again just this once. He had to. At 6:48 p.m., Rosa arrived first. Her hair tied back with a string of red yarn face splattered with accidental paint strokes. She brought a loaf of sourdough wrapped in wax paper and said nothing. At 6:51, Malik arrived nervous, overdressed in a blazer he clearly borrowed. He held a bouquet of slightly wilted daisies. I didn't know what to bring, he mumbled. They're perfect, Clara said, placing them in a milk bottle vase. At 6:59, Vince entered without knocking. 2 bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon under one arm. He looked around, took in the effort. The lights dimmed just right, the scent of rosemary and roasted garlic. Well, aren't we all dressed up for the apocalypse, he muttered. Clara smiled, and for once it reached her eyes. Sit down. They did. Conversation started slow. Rosa asked about Malik's thesis. Malik asked about Vince's tax clients. Vince joked about the IRS not needing to know everything. Clara listened, laughed when she should, nodded when expected, but inside she was counting. Not time, not wine glasses, but patterns, behaviors, reactions. She excused herself halfway through dessert, said something about more whipped cream, and stepped into the hallway. From the closet she pulled a tiny metal tin the size of a cigarette box. Inside, nestled in foam, was the recording device. She'd bought it online from a site that specialized in private investigation tools, the kind of place that probably also sold fake IDs and pepper spray lipstick. She returned to the living room as they were arguing about jazz. Under the chair, she thought. No one will look under the goddamn chair. She bent to pretend to retrieve a dropped spoon and slipped the device beneath the center chair cushion, the one they always rotated through. It clicked into place magnetically, activated. When she stood again, her heart was pounding, her hand trembling. But her face was granite. No one noticed. Vince was mid-rant about Miles Davis. Malik had zoned out, swirling his wine. Rosa was sketching absent-mindedly on a napkin. Clara sat back down and raised her glass. To old walls, she said. They looked up. To silent ghosts, she added. They chuckled, unsure but entertained. And then, almost inaudibly, as she looked down at the tablecloth her husband once bled on when he cut himself carving turkey in 2003, she whispered, "There are things I won't let die with me." The others didn't hear, but the recorder did, and that Clara thought was enough. The scent of rosemary roast still lingered in the air, mingling with the slow swirl of candle smoke and the low hum of jazz coming from the record player in the corner. The house was cloaked in an amber haze, the kind that only existed during the last hour of a long day or the first sip of a second bottle of wine. Clara sat at the head of the table, spine, straight eyes, steady, a hostess from another era. Her hands folded neatly in her lap as she let the others talk. Malik was recounting a story about a professor who'd mistaken his thesis draft for a therapy confession. Rosa was laughing, or at least exhaling in approval as she sipped her third glass. Even Vince, with his usual armor of irony and cynicism, had leaned back into his chair, one arm draped over the back wine glass, dangling from his fingers like a half-forgotten weapon. Clara smiled, but she wasn't drinking. She watched, calculated, waited. Vince poured himself another generous glass. He'd moved from sarcastic jabs to loose commentary, the kind of social lubrication that came with too much Cabernet and too little inhibition. "So tell me," Malik said, swirling his drink, What did you do before you became Clara's favorite tax wizard? Vince raised a brow. You mean in my past life? Yeah, Malik said. Come on, you've got that vibe. Like you used to be someone. I am someone, Vince said, mock offense thick in his tone. Just a slightly more regulated version. Rosa leaned in. Seriously, you're not from here. I can smell East Coast on you. Technically Southeast, he replied, smirking. I did a lot of hopping around back then. Atlanta for a while, Charlotte. Had a stint in Savannah. Not all by choice. Clara's fingers curled against the hem of her napkin. Atlanta, she asked, careful not to look too directly at him. Vince nodded mid-sip. Yeah, that city'll either baptize you or drown you. What were you doing there? Malik asked. Vince chuckled. You mean legally or unofficially? That got a laugh. Even Rosa smiled, her eyes catching Clara's, who didn't flinch, didn't blink. I used to help companies structure portfolios, Vince said, shrugging. Creative bookkeeping, optimization, some would say. Others would say, fraud, Rosa offered, half teasing. Vince grinned, tomato, tomato. Clara reached for the wine bottle, pretending to refill her glass. She didn't drink it, and once Vince continued, voice slurring ever so slightly. I helped this guy complete idiot fake an entire set of ownership papers to claim land he didn't actually have rights to. Big scheme, lots of zeros. It worked, until it didn't. Malik leaned forward, seriously. Seriously, Vince nodded. The guy wanted to flip the land, quick build some condos or a hotel or something. But the original investor backed out after the paperwork didn't hold up under scrutiny. Rosa raised an eyebrow. That sounds criminal. It was, Vince said bluntly, and beautifully executed. We had fake notarizations, falsified tax IDs, shell corporations, whole 9 yards. And the investor, Malik asked, lips parted. Vince looked away for the first time that evening, suddenly fascinated with the wax dripping down the candlestick. Old guy. Just wanted to leave something behind for his wife. Heard he dropped dead a few months later. Heart attack or something. Clara's breath caught, just barely, but enough. The room kept laughing like nothing had shifted. But for her, something had broken loose inside her chest, like a floorboard cracking under pressure. Something she'd buried. She stood. Excuse me. No one stopped her. She walked slowly, deliberately down the hallway and into her bedroom. The sound of laughter, of glasses clinking, of Vince still talking, faded behind her like a distant radio she didn't tune into anymore. She locked the door behind her, then walked to the closet. The safe was small, tucked behind old linens and a suitcase no one had used in years. She knelt, twisted the dial slowly. The combination was still the same, her wedding date. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were papers brittle with time, but preserved with care. Manila envelopes neatly labeled in her husband's handwriting, trust, contracts, zoning application, and then the thickest one, Georgia Project, 2005. Clara pulled it out and placed it gently on the bed. She opened the envelope and retrieved the pages. Her fingers no longer trembled. They moved like they'd rehearsed this before in dreams or nightmares. She found the contract, the one Martin had signed when he believed he was partnering in a prime development outside Atlanta, a new community that never broke ground. The signature on the final page had haunted her for decades. Nathan V. Halperin, not a real person, just a name. The lawyer said it was a fake identity, a shell, a ghost. But Clara knew handwriting. She'd seen Vince's name on his rental lease, and she'd seen this signature before. She held up the lease pulled from her file cabinet earlier that week when she first sensed something off. Laid it side by side with the contract. Same loops, same pressure on the V, same arrogant flick at the end of the last N. It was him. The man who bled her husband dry, left him a hollow shell of a dreamer, and vanished into smoke. Was sleeping upstairs. Was laughing in her living room. Was drinking her wine. Was living under her roof. Her throat tightened. Her eyes didn't water, not yet. She was past tears, past rage, past grief. This was something colder, something quieter. She stood there in the low light of the bedroom, holding 2 papers like 2 halves of a broken weapon, a broken heart. Her husband's words, the last ones before his collapse, echoed like ghosts in her head. I should have known better, Clara. I should have protected us. I thought I was leaving you something. He left her nothing. And now the nothing was sitting in her home. She placed the papers back in the envelope, slowly, neatly, respectfully. Then she reached under her bed and pulled out the small audio recorder she'd used to test earlier. The red light blinked, still recording, still listening. She checked the timestamp. It had caught everything. She placed it in the drawer, then unlocked the bedroom door and returned to the hallway. The conversation in the living room was still humming quieter now, mellowed into the early stages of drunkenness. She walked halfway down the hallway and paused where the shadows met the edge of light. Vince was telling some story about a lake house and bad tequila. Rosa had her feet curled under her on the couch. Malik looked like he was starting to nod off. Clara didn't speak, didn't move. She watched, and for the first time she saw them not as tenants, not even as people. She saw them as possibilities. And Vince was no longer a maybe. He was a fact, a fixed point, a mistake returned from the dead. But there was no fear in her, no panic. There was only clarity. She turned away. Back in her room, she sat down at her desk and opened a blank journal page. Her pen didn't hesitate this time. Friday, 9:13 p.m. Vince Halperin confessed under influence. Referenced Atlanta falsified documents and dead investor. Verified signature match 100%. She paused, then added, I won't go to the police yet. Not until I know what justice actually looks like. She closed the book. And outside, Vince laughed again. And this time Clara smiled, but for a different reason. Not out of politeness, out of promise. The room had smelled of antiseptic and sweat. Machines hummed softly, indifferent to human suffering. The walls were painted the color of resignation, a pale off-white tone that tried too hard to comfort. Clara sat in the vinyl chair next to Martin's hospital bed, her hands folded in her lap, her face locked into stillness. The silence between them was not peace. It was the tension of a final hour that refused to admit itself. Martin was propped up by pillows. His face, once confident and boyish, even at 60, now sagged under the weight of betrayal. The IV line ran into his arm like a tether to some invisible promise that had already been broken. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice a mere rasp. Clara leaned closer. Shh, don't. I thought I was protecting you, giving you something. His eyes fluttered. I thought that land would... You didn't know, Martin, she said, swallowing hard. You were lied to. I was stupid. No, you trusted. He looked away ashamed. Outside, the rain beat steadily against the window pane, not a storm, just steady enough to sound like time marching past. I signed everything myself, he murmured. Didn't even let our lawyer read it. Clara closed her eyes. You were trying to be the man you thought I needed. Martin reached for her hand, weak and trembling. There was a man, tall, East Coast accent. Said his name was Halperin. Had all the papers. He even knew your name. Clara stiffened. What? He said he admired women who stayed. He said, you got a good one. Clara didn't answer. Her mind burned it into memory. Clara. His voice was barely audible. I thought I was building something. And now I'm just... His breath hitched. Just a man in debt. You're still my husband, she said. But his eyes were already far away. And then the machine made that sound, the long, flat tone that carves a line through everything you thought was forever. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She pressed her forehead to his hand and sat there for hours listening to the rain and the hollow silence that came after. 20 years later, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, the same manila envelope resting in her lap. Her fingers traced the edge of the old contract. The ink had faded, but the betrayal was still vivid. She opened the drawer beside her and pulled out the leather-bound journal. She didn't write in it every day, only on the nights when memory refused to be polite. March 16th. He confessed indirectly. Slurred, stupid, proud. Said he faked the documents, the name, the deal. Said the investor died. Martin, I knew, but now I know. The voice, the story, the signature. It's him, Vince. The man who stole our future and drank the profit. She paused. The pen hovered. I don't need revenge. I need clarity. I need consequences. I need to decide what justice means. She closed the journal and tucked it beneath her pillow. Then she opened the closet and reached for the second recording device. Smaller, more discreet, long range. A gift to herself 2 Christmases ago, one she never had the courage to use until now. This one would live under Vince's dresser behind the wooden panel that hadn't been nailed properly since he moved in. She'd noticed it. She'd waited. Clara moved like a woman who'd rehearsed this in her mind 1,000 times. Upstairs, Vince was in his room talking to someone on the phone. She paused at the top of the staircase, hidden by the shadows. The door wasn't fully closed. His voice leaked through the crack, low but unmistakable. "No, I didn't say my real name. Are you insane?" A pause. "She's not dumb. Okay. She's been looking at me weird ever since I mentioned Atlanta. I shouldn't have said that shit. I was drunk." Another pause. "I don't know, maybe she figured it out. I don't know how much she remembers. People forget things when they're old, don't they?" Clara didn't blink, didn't move. "But if she connects me to that deal..." That old guy croaked, "Remember, that's a death. That's real time." Silence. "I swear if this comes back on me, I'm gone. I'll vanish again, like I always do." She stepped back before she could be seen, made her way downstairs, and stood in the kitchen, gripping the countertop so tightly her knuckles turned white. He had said it. Vanished again. This wasn't the first life Vince had borrowed. Back in her bedroom, she slid the second recorder into a drawer and sat at her desk. She didn't write this time. She just stared at the wall at the framed picture of Martin holding a fish on their last camping trip, smiling like a man who believed in tomorrow. "Do you see him, Martin?" she whispered. "He's here, in our house." Laughing, her voice cracked. "But I won't let him disappear again." She reached under the bed and pulled out the file marked Unfiled Reports. Inside were letters she'd drafted years ago. One to the Texas Board of Accountancy, another to the local police. One addressed to whom it may concern, fraudulent activity report. She never mailed them. Every time she wrote, she convinced herself there wasn't enough proof. No signature, no address, no full name. Just fragments, hunches. But now she had dates, confessions, audio, a name tied to a place, and a man too arrogant to imagine anyone would remember the truth. She looked at the envelope again. She could mail it tonight, end this. But something held her hand back. A voice, Martin's voice from another memory. "There's justice, Clara, and there's healing. Sometimes they don't live in the same place." Could both be true? Could she make him face it without destroying what was left of herself? The house creaked. Pipes groaned. The old timbers carried the weight of old lives. She stood and walked into the hallway, paused again at the stairwell. Silence now. Vince had hung up. She made her way back into the living room, glanced at the wine glasses still on the table, one still half full. She reached for it, sniffed, the scent of Cabernet, still sharp. She sat on the couch, lifted Martin's picture from the mantel, held it in her lap. "I don't need to watch him burn," she said aloud. "I just want him to build something that matters, even if it's the first honest thing he's ever done." The night thickened outside. Crickets began to sing under the porch. Lights from passing cars cast faint shadows against the curtains. The city kept moving, living, ignoring. But inside the house, in that room filled with silence and consequence, Clara sat with her husband's ghost, her enemy's echo, and her own breath. Tomorrow she would start the reckoning. But tonight she allowed herself to feel the weight of it. Not fear, not grief. Just purpose. She set the picture back on the mantel, then stood cross to the window and stared into the dark. "He doesn't get to vanish," she whispered. "Not this time." The kitchen was silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock, a battered old thing Clara had never bothered to replace. It ticked too fast, always 5 minutes ahead, like it was trying to outrun time itself. The rest of the house had gone quiet. Rosa had retreated to her studio, Malik, to his tiny upstairs room. Vince was washing his wine glass, humming a Sinatra song off-key as if guilt didn't stain the air around him. Clara stood by the doorway, arms crossed, back straight. A woman forged in grief and tempered in silence. She didn't speak until he turned around. "Atlanta," she said. Vince froze, his hand still on the faucet, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "What about it?" he said too casually. "You said you lived there once, worked some contracts." He shrugged, not looking at her. "That was years ago. You mentioned a land deal, fake paperwork, an investor who died." His jaw tightened, but he chuckled, shaking his head. "We were drinking. People exaggerate." "I don't," she said flatly. He turned to face her, his expression hardening. "Is there a point to this?" Clara walked slowly to the table. She reached into her sweater pocket and placed something on the wood between them. A small black voice recorder still warm from her hand. She pressed play. The audio was faint, but Vince's voice was unmistakable. I helped this guy complete idiot fake an entire set of ownership papers. He even knew the guy's wife's name. Heard he dropped dead a few months later. Heart attack or something. She hit stop. Vince's face went pale. Jesus, he muttered. You were recording me. Clara didn't blink. I needed the truth. He backed away, almost stumbling against the counter. You have no idea what you're doing. That was 20 years ago. You stole everything from him, she said, voice calm. From us. You can't prove it in court, he said quickly. No jury's going to convict me based on some half-drunk story. She smiled, not kind, not cruel, just tired. I don't plan to go to court, she said. Unless I have to. Vince swallowed hard. His defenses were crumbling fast. What do you want, Clara? He asked, genuinely unnerved now. She stepped forward, calm, unshakable. You're going to pay it back. He laughed, sharp and broken. What with interest? You think I have that kind of money? I don't even own my car outright. Not with money, she said. With time, with work, with something real. Vince stared at her like she'd spoken another language. You're going to teach, she said. A beat. He frowned. Come again. You're going to teach accounting, financial literacy, budgeting, to underprivileged kids, high schoolers, seniors in community centers, anyone who can't afford a tutor. Why? Because it's what you know. And because those are the kinds of people you've spent a lifetime hurting. He shook his head. I'm not a teacher. I'm barely a citizen. Then consider it your community service, she said. 100 students, 6 months, no salary. You'll log the hours. I'll monitor. Vince let out a bitter laugh. This is insane. I'm not some redemption project. No, Clara said, you're a debt. The words hung in the air like a gavel. I could be halfway to Mexico by tomorrow, he said. Change my name again. You really think I'd stick around for charity? Clara reached into her other pocket. She slid a second envelope across the table, cream-colored, sealed. What's that? He asked, not touching it. My letter to the state attorney's office, she said. With the tape, copies of the old contracts, testimony, a list of your aliases, including Nathan V. Halperin. Vince looked down at it like it might explode. If I mail it, she continued, it won't just be fraud. It'll be wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, cross-state charges. He stared at the envelope for a long time. Clara took a step closer. Her voice softened but didn't lose its edge. I don't want revenge. I've lived with that ghost too long already. But you're still writing your story. And right now it's just pages of rot. She pointed to the envelope. This is one ending, but it's not the only one. Vince finally looked at her. Really looked. You're serious, he said. Clara nodded. I'm offering you a different sentence, she said. One you serve in the daylight. He slumped into a chair, his hands in his hair. You don't even know me. I know enough, Clara said. And so do you. He stayed silent for a long moment. Then I'll look like a joke in front of those kids. Then be a joke they remember. I don't even like people. Good, she said. Because this isn't about you. He laughed, not bitter this time, just hollow. This is some twisted kind of blackmail. This is a bargain, Clara said. He looked at the recorder, the envelope, her face. And for the first time, Vince Halperin, con artist, manipulator, thief, looked like a man cornered not by the law, but by his own past. What if I screw it up, he asked. Then you'll start again, Clara said. And again, until it means something. He exhaled hard, rubbed his temples, then slowly nodded. 6 months, 100 students. That's a long sentence. Clara turned to leave. He called after her. Why not just turn me in? You'd win. She paused in the doorway. I'm not looking to win, she said. I'm looking to live. And then she was gone. Vince sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the envelope, the recorder and his reflection in the window. A man who'd spent a lifetime escaping judgment only to be convicted by mercy. The classroom was a repurposed storage room in the basement of an underfunded community center, a place that smelled faintly of old books, overcooked rice, and forgotten ambition. The walls were patched with uneven coats of blue paint and covered with curling posters about financial literacy from 2008. A single oscillating fan in the corner did its best to pretend the room was ventilated. Vince Halperin stood at the front, gripping a dry erase marker like a weapon. He wore a wrinkled button-up sleeves, rolled up sweat beading at his temples. On the whiteboard behind him was a simple heading, "What is money?" He'd been staring at it for 5 minutes. 16 kids ranging from 11 to 17 slouched in plastic chairs, half of them scrolling phones beneath the desk or doodling with their mechanical pencils. One boy wore headphones so visible it was almost admirable. "Okay," Vince cleared his throat. "So, money." A girl in the 3rd row raised her hand. He pointed at her. "Are you a real teacher?" she asked, voice flat. "No," Vince admitted. "Then what are you?" He exhaled through his nose. "Someone who used to screw people over with money." The class shifted slightly. Another hand went up. This one belonged to a small girl in a faded hoodie, eyes sharp as broken glass. "You ever go to jail for that?" Vince blinked. "No," he said. She squinted. "But you should have." A few of the other kids laughed. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably." There was a pause. Then cool. He turned back to the board, grateful for the lifeline. "Okay. So the reason you're here," he said, "is because most schools don't teach you how to handle money. They teach you the square root of imaginary numbers, but not how to read a lease or negotiate interest rates." No reaction. He kept going. "Money's a language. If you don't speak it, people will use it against you. That's what happened to me, and it's what I did to other people." Now a few heads lifted. "I learned the language too well, used it to twist things, and someone paid the price." He turned and started drawing on the board. "What's a budget?" A girl in the back said, "A thing my mom doesn't have." Some chuckles. Vince smiled but didn't laugh. "Let's make one." And that's how the first class began, not with inspiration, but with confession. Meanwhile, back at the house, Malik was standing in Clara's office, flipping through a worn leather planner on her desk. He hadn't meant to snoop. He'd gone in looking for the envelope of spare keys, then caught a glimpse of the planner lying open, pages filled with neatly penned appointments. Monday, meeting at EB, Blackstone High. Tuesday, call from Food Access Program Rep. Wednesday, Zoom with Mr. Halver Westbank Learning Center. Thursday, confirm scholarship fund set up Friday. Site check at community basement classroom. He flipped back a few weeks, more of the same. Every entry was a step toward building this class Vince was now awkwardly leading. He sat down slowly. Clara had done all of this, quietly, without telling anyone, without expecting credit. He glanced toward the bookshelf where several folders were stacked under a paperweight shaped like a bird. He lifted the top one. Inside, lists of potential student names, letters of recommendation Clara had requested from local schools, emails between her and low-income housing coordinators, lists of kids from shelters, single-parent homes, probation programs, all coded in her cursive, all real. He flipped to a draft letter. "This man once stole futures. Now I ask your trust in helping him rebuild some." There was no signature, just CP. Malik swallowed hard. He remembered Vince's voice, cocky and half-drunk the night of the dinner. He remembered Clara's silence, her watchfulness, how her smile that night had been a mask, porcelain and impenetrable. She wasn't just testing Vince, she was rebuilding something from ashes, and Malik hadn't seen it. Back at the classroom, Vince was getting grilled. "No, you can't buy a house with cash unless you're filthy rich," he was explaining, pacing slowly. "Because houses are stupid expensive and banks don't trust you unless they can trap you in a mortgage." A boy with braids asked, "So mortgages are like prison?" Vince raised an eyebrow. "Ever try paying one for 30 years? The class laughed again, and Vince for the first time laughed with them. Not the smug laugh he used to use at poker tables or business meetings. This one was lighter. "We're going to talk about scams next week," he said. "I know that subject real well," obviously said the girl in the hoodie. "Shut up, Kiara," someone else snapped. Vince held up a hand. "She's right." He looked at Kiara. "You're smart. Keep being a pain in the ass. You'll survive longer." She tilted her head like a cat sizing up prey. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. Vince paused. He could lie, could say it was for the community, or because he believed in second chances. Instead, he answered the way Clara would have wanted. "Because I owe someone a debt," he said, "and I'm not paying it in money." The class was quiet for a beat. Then Kiara said, "That's kind of baller." More laughter. He checked his watch. "All right, that's it for today. Next time, how to open a checking account without letting a bank screw you." The kids started packing up, some slower than others. A few came up to ask quiet questions. One girl asked how to help her mom handle rent payments that kept changing. A boy wanted to know how to keep his older brother from cashing his paychecks. Vince listened. He answered. He stayed 20 minutes past time. When he left, it was dark. He stepped out into the humid Austin evening, lit a cigarette he didn't really want, and stared up at the dim orange glow of the sky. Then he saw Clara. She was standing across the parking lot, leaning against her car, arms folded. She didn't wave, just waited. He walked over slowly. "Well," she asked. "They didn't throw things," he said. "Good start." He hesitated. "Then you set this up before I agreed, didn't you?" She nodded. "That's manipulative." "That's strategic," she corrected. He exhaled smoke. "They're smart." "I know. They asked real questions." "That's the point." "I didn't answer all of them right." "Then you'll try again." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Vince looked at her. "I didn't think you'd actually follow through on this. I figured you'd break, report me, ruin me." "I might still." He raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "I'm watching." He nodded. "Fair." She unlocked her car, about to leave. He stopped her. "Clara." She turned. "I'm not a good person." "I know." He waited. "But," she added, "you could be a useful one." He smiled faintly. Then she drove away. Vince stood there in the parking lot alone, the cigarette now burning down to his fingers, a strange sense of possibility blooming in his chest. Like guilt had finally grown roots and sprouted into something else. Not redemption. Not yet. But maybe the first lesson had been his own. Malik was waiting on the porch when Clara got home that evening. He was sitting on the top step, arms resting on his knees, the light from the hallway behind him stretching his silhouette into a long, dark line across the deck. He didn't turn when she approached, just kept staring out toward the street, where the streetlight buzzed with a dying halo. "I heard," he said flatly. "You let him teach." Clara paused. Her keys dangled in her hand, catching moonlight. "I did." Malik turned to her now. "You know who he is." She looked down at him. "Yes." He shook his head. "You know what he did?" "I do." "And you're just letting him stand in front of kids." "I'm letting him stand in front of his own failure," she said, walking past him toward the door. He stood. "That man destroyed your life." Clara stopped. Her hand gripped the doorknob, but she didn't open it. "He didn't destroy my life," she said quietly. "He stole something precious from it. But life, it kept going." Malik stepped forward. "He conned your husband, left you with nothing. And now he's wearing a name tag like some born-again saint." "He's not a saint," Clara snapped. "He's a man drowning in the very lies he built. I'm not saving him. I'm watching if he'll save himself." Malik's face twisted. "Why are you the one doing the watching? Why is it your job to redeem a man like that?" Clara turned to him. Her eyes were tired, but they held. "Because if I don't," she said, "then everything he did to us becomes permanent. And I refuse to let him be the last word on my husband's memory." Malik opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. She looked at him with something close to tenderness. "You're angry," she said. He nodded. "So was I," she continued, "for 20 years. But anger is a fire that eats from the inside. Justice. It has to build something." "And if he walks away?" Malik asked. "Then he walks into a police station in handcuffs," Clara replied. "One way or another, the story ends." She stepped inside, leaving Malik outside with the sound of the screen door clicking shut behind her. Upstairs, Rosa was on her hands and knees trying to fish a fallen paintbrush out from under her dresser. She reached too far, fingers brushing something unfamiliar, cold, square, smooth. She pulled it out into the light. It was a small black recorder. She stared at it, then pressed play. There was no mistaking the voices. Vince's slurred confession, Clara's measured silence, the clinking of glasses, the sound of betrayal. Rosa shot to her feet, heart racing, the paintbrush forgotten. 10 minutes later, Clara was in the kitchen when Rosa stormed in, holding the recorder like it was a live grenade. "You planted this," she hissed. Clara turned, taken off guard. "Rosa, you recorded us." "No," Clara said. "Not you." Then her voice was rising. "Vince." Rosa stared at her. "I was trying to confirm something, a suspicion." Rosa laughed bitter. "Jesus, Clara. You've been playing detective while pretending to knit scarves and offer tea." Clara stepped forward. "It wasn't about you. It was in my room. I needed a place he wouldn't suspect." "That's not a justification, that's an invasion." Clara's voice turned low. "It was a risk. I took it." "And what now? You're what, his parole officer?" "I'm his reckoning," Clara said. "Until I decide otherwise." Rosa shook her head. "I thought you were the only person in this house who didn't play games." Clara's mouth tightened. "I stopped playing a long time ago. Now I just finish what others start." You should have told me, Rosa said. You would have told me not to do it. Exactly. Clara didn't answer. Rosa backed away. I can't stay here. Rosa, I've been painted enough times, Clara. But I don't want to live inside someone else's sketch. Not anymore. She turned and walked out the screen door, slamming behind her. Upstairs she began packing. Malik, who had heard the raised voices, now avoided Clara entirely. He left early in the morning, came home late, eyes downcast, headphones in. He didn't slam doors or throw words like knives. He just disappeared one small piece at a time. Clara noticed, but she let him have the space. She had her own reckoning to manage. At the community center, Vince stood in front of the whiteboard, marker in hand, sweat on his brow. Today's lesson, APR compound interest and the art of not drowning in debt. The kids didn't laugh anymore. They asked questions. They challenged him. They rolled their eyes, but they listened. And Vince, he taught, stiffly, awkwardly, with the grace of a man trying to juggle knives and not draw blood. Each answer was a mirror to something he'd once twisted. Each example was a memory of someone he'd burned. Every worksheet was a quiet apology. After class, he stayed behind, erased the board, straightened the chairs, picked up a crumpled note a student left behind. You talk like you've seen war. You gonna win this one. He folded it and put it in his pocket. That evening, Clara stood outside the classroom window. She didn't go in. She didn't speak. She just watched through the glass as Vince explained how payday loans operated like legalized theft. Drawing a diagram so simplistic even the most skeptical student leaned in. There was a strange grace to him now. Not confidence that had been burned away. This was something raw, earnest, maybe even real. Her hand tightened on the frame. Her throat thickened just slightly. Not with pity, with clarity. He was trying, and trying hurt. She turned and walked away before he saw her. The smell of dry erase markers and musty carpet had become familiar to Vince. Routine. He unlocked the supply cabinet with the care of someone protecting something fragile. Inside his folders, his slides, his handwritten notes. Not Clara's, not borrowed, his. For the first time in his life, Vince Halpern was building something not meant to deceive. He stood in front of the board and wrote, Week 4, How to Read a Paycheck Without Getting Screwed. The room began to fill slowly at first, then more steadily. Students shuffled in backpacks, dragging earbuds and eyes down. But they came, and most of them stayed. Vince turned from the board and looked at the room. All right, he said. Who here has ever had a paycheck bounce? A few hesitant hands. Who here has ever cashed a check at a gas station for a small fee? More hands. Who here, he added, has no idea what I'm talking about and just came for the free snacks? Laughter. He smiled. Not performative, not smug, just real. Then he began the lesson, not reading from a book, not parroting lines. He spoke from lived failure, explained deductions, employer tricks, predatory temp agencies, and he listened. When a student raised a hand, he stopped. When one rolled their eyes, he asked why. This was new to him, the listening. It hurt in ways his old life never warned him about. Near the end of class, as kids were scribbling notes, a boy in the second row, small, wiry, with 2 big shoes and anger in his shoulders, raised his hand slowly. Yeah, Vince asked. Can I ask you something not on the worksheet? Vince nodded. Go ahead. The boy hesitated. Then has anyone ever forgiven you? The room got quiet. Vince froze. Just a second, but it was enough. He looked down at his hands, fingers ink-stained from the marker, still calloused in the shape of the lives he'd broken. There's one person, he said, voice thick. And no, I don't deserve it. The boy didn't reply, just nodded once, as if that was enough. Maybe it was. Across the city, in a brighter room with taller windows, Rosa stood before a blank canvas. Her hands were clean for once, no paint, no charcoal, no brush, just fingers and silence. She'd been gone for a week. Needed space, she told herself. But something in her had pulled her back. Not to the house, not yet, but to the classroom. She'd shown up during Vince's second week, stood at the back of the room while he taught budgeting to kids who barely had lunch money. He didn't see her. Or maybe he did and didn't flinch. Either way, she stayed. Today she walked to the front of the classroom during a break. Mind if I crash this? She asked. Vince blinked. What? She dropped her bag, pulled out a stack of sketch pads. You talk numbers. I'll talk pictures. We'll see who listens better. The kids lit up. Vince stepped aside. By the end of the hour, she had 10 kids drawing symbolic budgets, a piggy bank as a broken heart. A dollar bill with wings, a stack of coins bleeding red paint. Vince watched from the back, arms folded. She caught his eye. He mouthed thank you. She didn't smile, but she stayed. Clara got the invitation on a Wednesday afternoon. It arrived in an envelope that smelled like paper and lavender. Inside a single page, Miss Clara Prescott. We would be honored to have you attend our community showcase, presenting the work of students from our financial literacy and arts program. Friday, 7 p.m. Thank you for helping make this possible. There was no name signed, but she recognized the typewriter font. It matched the old machine she kept in the hallway, the one she hadn't used since Martin died. Clara folded the letter slowly, her hands lingering on the creases. Then she looked toward the front door. She hadn't intended to attend. She would now. Friday evening, the center was decorated in construction paper stars and poster boards. Folding chairs lined the multi-purpose room. Children buzzed in the corners, nervous in their pressed shirts and hair gel. Clara stood near the entrance, invisible in her silence. Malik appeared beside her. No words, just presence. She was surprised to see him, but not displeased. "Thought you were avoiding me," she murmured. He stared straight ahead. "I was. And now," he glanced at her. "Now I'm watching." She smiled. The lights dimmed. The MC, a 16-year-old named Darren, took the mic and welcomed everyone. First came presentations from art students, then testimonies from those who'd learned how to open their first checking accounts. Then finally Darren returned to the stage. "Our final speaker," he said, "teaches us stuff nobody else bothered to. He's weird and kind of blunt, but we learned more from him in 4 weeks than from any adult in years." Polite laughter. "Please welcome Mr. V." The applause was hesitant, then slowly grew. Vince stepped onto the stage. He wore a too-tight blazer and a thrift store tie and looked like he might pass out. His hands trembled against the microphone. "Hi," he began. "I'm Vince. I used to be a guy who knew how to move money around so no one could find it." A few gasps, some laughter. "Now I'm just a guy trying to help people not get buried by it." He took a breath, saw Clara in the crowd. She didn't nod, didn't smile. But her presence rooted him. "I don't have much to say except thank you." He looked down. There was a woman who could have destroyed me. She didn't. Instead, she asked me to build something. I didn't understand why at first. His voice cracked. "But now I think I do." Silence filled the room. She wanted me to face what I did. Every day. In the eyes of kids who deserve better. In the questions that hurt to answer. She gave me a punishment that felt like a gift. Vince wiped at his eye with the back of his hand. "I'm not fixed. I'm not proud. But I'm trying. Because someone believed I still could." The room was silent. Clara felt Malik's hand graze hers. Not a grasp. Just contact. Connection. Vince nodded once. "That's all, thanks." He stepped down, heart pounding in his chest. The applause came late, then grew. As he walked past the rows, he caught Clara's eyes again. She didn't say a word. But Rosa did. From the back of the room, she unveiled a canvas, tall, vibrant, textured in oil. It was Clara, sitting on a bench, alone, backlit by dusk. But her shadow stretched wide, and inside that shadow were small silhouettes of children, looking forward, learning. The envelope was thick, official, and bore the insignia of the Travis County District Attorney's Office. It arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered not by the mailman, but by a plainclothes officer with tired eyes and a clipboard. Clara accepted it without flinching. "Have a good day, ma'am," the officer said. She nodded, closing the door without a word. In the quiet of her kitchen, she stood at the counter, fingers grazing the unbroken seal. She didn't open it right away, just stared at it, like it might vanish if she waited long enough. But it didn't vanish. She broke the seal. Inside was a letter, brief and clinical. "Miss Clara Prescott, per your inquiry on March 22nd, we confirm that the complaint you submitted in 2005 against a Nathan V. Halperin remains on record, though it was never formally filed. The accompanying materials, including your written testimony and unsigned statement, are still in our archive. If you wish to pursue action, please contact our office within 30 days. Office of the District Attorney, Travis County." Clara read it twice, then folded it slowly and placed it on the table beside her teacup. The cup was full but untouched. Some debts didn't vanish just because you stopped collecting them. Malik found the footage 3 days later, buried inside a backup folder on Clara's old laptop. He hadn't meant to find it. He was cleaning files, trying to help her move everything to a newer machine. But there it was, labeled simply, Courthouse, May 2006. He clicked it open. The screen showed Clara 20 years younger, but with the same storm in her spine. She stood on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse, clutching a manila envelope, the same one he'd seen her tuck into the bottom drawer of her desk. She stared at the entrance for a long time. People walked past her. Some looked, most didn't. At one point, she took a step forward. Her fingers gripped the envelope tighter. Then she stopped, turned, walked away, not hurriedly, not defeated. Just walked away. Malik sat back in the chair, stunned. It wasn't fear that had stopped her. It was something else. He found Vince behind the community center, smoking next to a rusted dumpster. The sun was setting, the sky bruised and purple. "You got a minute?" Malik asked. Vince exhaled. "Not really, but go ahead." Malik leaned against the wall beside him. "I saw the footage," he said. Vince didn't react, just watched the smoke curl in the air. "She stood outside that courthouse 20 years ago, with everything she needed to ruin you, and she didn't go in." Vince's voice was barely above a whisper. "I figured." "Why?" Vince shrugged. "Guilt is a funny thing. You think you're ready to pay the bill. Then someone lets you walk out." Malik shook his head. "She didn't let you walk out. She gave you time to figure out how to walk back in." Vince looked at him now. Malik continued. "So if you're going to stand in front of all these kids and teach them how not to screw up their lives, maybe make sure you don't keep screwing up yours." Vince dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his shoe. "I haven't asked for forgiveness," he said. "She gave it anyway," Malik replied. Vince nodded. "Then I better start doing something that deserves it." The next week, Vince launched the online class. It started with a single camera borrowed from the community center and a YouTube channel called Break the Chain Money for Real Life. His first video was awkward, his tie crooked, the audio bad, but it was honest. He talked about the first time he manipulated a tax return, how he inflated numbers and ghost wrote fake deductions. Then he showed the right way to do it. The second video was about rent contracts. The third was about credit scores. By the 10th video, he had over 20,000 views. By the 15th, a high school in San Antonio asked to use his lessons in their after-school program. He didn't monetize it. He refused sponsorships. He answered every comment himself. One kid wrote, "My dad's in jail for fraud. I didn't know what that even meant. Now I do. Thanks." Another, "You're proof people can change. Don't stop." Vince didn't reply to that one. He just stared at the screen for a long time until his reflection blurred. Rosa's exhibit opened a month later in a small downtown gallery that used to be a laundromat. The walls were lined with canvases, mostly black and gray textures layered like scar tissue. But at the center stood one painting that drew everyone in. It was called The Weight. It showed a man bent over a ledger, red ink pouring from his hands. Behind him, a chalkboard. On it, dozens of children's silhouettes watching, waiting. And in the corner, nearly hidden in shadow, a woman. Not smiling, not weeping, just watching. A single hand on the light switch. The critics called it unforgiving and strangely hopeful. Rosa called it true. The emails started pouring in after that. A journalist from PBS, a producer from a documentary series about redemption stories, a talk show from New York, a podcast in Los Angeles. Everyone wanted to interview the fraudster who chose to teach instead of run. Vince deleted most of them. He didn't want to become a symbol. He wasn't cured. He was surviving. When the local NBC affiliate sent a crew to his next class, he politely told them they could film the students but not him. "I'm not the story," he said. "They are." He left the room before the camera started rolling. Clara watched the segment that night on a small TV in her bedroom. The footage showed Rosa guiding a student through a collage about budgeting, Malik helping two boys create a visual chart for expenses, and Vince's voice just off camera explaining APR like it was poetry. She turned the volume down and let the images play. At the bottom of the screen, the news banner read, "From Conviction to Connection, Local Program Redefines Justice." She reached for her journal open to a blank page and wrote, "Some debts can't be paid back, but they can be paid forward." Then she closed the journal and sat still, the quiet like a balm across her skin. The next morning, she walked out to the mailbox and found another envelope. Same office, same seal, but this time the letter inside was different. "Miss Prescott, as per our previous correspondence, this is a final notice regarding your 2005 complaint. If you do not wish to proceed, your file will be formally closed in 10 days. District Attorney's Office. She stood on the porch, envelope in one hand, mug in the other. Then with careful fingers she folded the letter into a perfect square, walked back inside, lit a match, held the flame to the paper until it curled. Ash drifted into the sink. She turned on the faucet and let it go. The smell of old wood was different when it was about to be left behind. Clara stood in the center of her living room, barefoot on floorboards that had groaned beneath 26 winters, 52 seasons of rain, 3 heartbreaks, and now an ending. Light filtered through the lace curtains, and dust danced in the air like little spirits refusing to be exorcised. The house was quiet, but not still. It pulsed with goodbye. In the hallway, an open suitcase rested beside a stack of photo albums and a single box marked Rebecca, San Antonio. Clara didn't pack much. A few clothes, Martin's pocket watch, a letter from her daughter, and the same battered tea kettle that had seen more confessions than a church pew. Everything else stayed. She turned and opened the linen closet, reached in, touched the wool blanket Rosa had given her one Christmas, still smelling faintly of turpentine. She folded it gently and placed it at the very top of the donation pile. Behind her, the front door creaked open. "Hello," came Malik's voice. "In here," Clara said, not turning. Malik entered first, followed by Rosa, then Vince, trailing behind like he still didn't know if he belonged. "You ready?" Rosa asked. "No," Clara replied, "but I'm done." They looked around the room. Everything had been stripped back. The furniture was gone, the rug rolled up. Only a few framed photographs remained on the mantel. Malik walked over and picked one up, a faded image of Martin and Clara standing on a beach wind in their hair eyes, laughing. He placed it gently in Clara's suitcase without asking. Rosa opened a cabinet, found a forgotten jar of paintbrushes, and held them like a relic. Vince wandered to the window and stared out at the street. His reflection in the glass looked older than he felt, maybe more honest. Clara reached for the small satchel on the kitchen table and pulled out 4 mugs, none of them matching. She poured water into each, no ceremony, just habit, then passed them around like communion. They sat on the floor. No table, no cushions. Just themselves, the echo of a house that once held them, and the truth they'd built between walls older than their own secrets. "I want to say something," Clara said. The others looked up. She scanned their faces. The painter, the skeptic, the man she once thought of as a virus. "All 3 of you," she began, "have in your own way broken something in me." No one moved. "But each of you," she continued, "also helped put something back." Malik looked down. Rosa blinked hard. Vince didn't breathe. "This house," Clara said, "was never sacred. But it held sacred things. Pain, hope, memory. And none of it would have mattered without people to ruin it, then stay long enough to help it breathe again." She took a long sip of water, set the mug down, and stood. "You 3 made me believe in people again, even when I had every reason not to." She walked to the far corner of the room where her desk had once stood. There was only the outline now, a sun-faded shadow of where the wood had sat for years. From her back pocket she pulled out an envelope. She crouched and slid it into the built-in drawer beneath the window ledge, a drawer almost no one knew existed. "What's that?" Rosa asked. Clara stood slowly. Her knees popped. "Something for the next person who thinks they're alone." Malik looked at her. "You gonna tell us what it says?" She smiled. "It's not for you." But after a pause she changed her mind. "It says this," she began, voice firm. "I did not forgive out of weakness. I forgave because I was strong enough to let go. If you are reading this, you've come into a room that has seen both betrayal and redemption. I hope you leave it with more of the latter. Clara Prescott." No one said anything for a long time. Vince finally broke the silence. "I don't think I deserve this ending." "You don't," Clara said flat. Then she softened. "But you stayed. That counts." He nodded, tears threatening to rise. Rosa stepped forward. She reached for Clara and hugged her, tight, real. Then Malik. Then Vince, last cautious, like a man approaching a door he once slammed. Clara embraced them all. Not to say goodbye, to transfer something wordless. Outside, the moving van rumbled in the driveway. Clara glanced around the room one last time. The paint chipped near the corner. The dent in the floor where Martin had dropped a hammer. The crack in the ceiling that looked from the right angle like a lightning bolt. She walked to the door. "Lock it after I leave," she said. "Let the silence settle." She stepped outside, suitcase in hand. The three of them stood in the empty room, staring at the place where she'd stood. No one moved. Vince whispered, "So this is what closure sounds like." Rosa turned and looked at him. "No," she said. "This is what strength looks like." Malik walked to the window, watched Clara climb into the van. She didn't wave. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. The door closed behind her. Not with drama, not with finality, just with the quiet click of a life moving forward. And behind her, in that now empty house, 3 people stood in the last echoes of their old selves, witnesses to a woman who had every reason to burn the world down, but instead chose to leave the match unlit. The soil in San Antonio was tougher than Clara remembered. She knelt in the garden behind her daughter's house, digging through dry earth with a hand trowel, sweat gathering at her temples under the morning sun. Her knees ached, her back protested, but the ache was honest, earned. Behind her, the small wooden fence swayed gently with the breeze. Tomatoes were beginning to climb. Basil thrived. Lavender, too. Life, when planted right even in the aftermath of ruin, had a funny way of growing toward the light. Clara wiped her forehead with the back of her glove, then sat back on her heels staring at the row of green just beginning to sprout. "Look at you," she whispered. "You stubborn little things." From inside the house, laughter echoed. Rebecca and her 2 sons, 11 and 7, argued over breakfast cereal and math homework. The sound came to Clara like music through gauze, familiar but never entirely hers. She was still learning how to fit into this new space, how to be mother again, or grandmother, or just present. Some mornings she woke expecting to find herself back on Trinity Street, the kettle whistling Vince's heavy steps overhead. But then the smell of lemon wood soap and her daughter's calm voice would anchor her in the now. She didn't miss the house. She missed the fire it lit in her. But she had new fires now. In the afternoons, she sat at a small desk in the guest room, her office, the kids called it, working on a book she swore she'd never write. The title was scrawled in pencil on the cover page, Mercy Measured. It wasn't a memoir, not exactly. More a conversation between the woman she was and the woman who watched the worst of someone else become the best in herself. She wrote every day, slow and stubborn like the basil growing through Texas clay. Vince's online classes passed 500 subscribers in less than 2 months. It was never supposed to grow like that. He'd imagined a few curious kids, maybe a school or 2, but the algorithm had its own ideas. A clip of him explaining compound interest in a gas station went viral. The comments flooded in. "I wish someone had taught me this before I ruined my credit. My dad left. This guy taught me how to keep our apartment. He messed up, but he's fixing it, so can I." Vince didn't smile when he read those messages. He nodded, quietly, then got back to filming the next lesson. His studio was a corner of his apartment no bigger than a closet. 1 ring light, a whiteboard, a second-hand webcam. He never wore suits. He wore what was clean. He didn't talk like a professor. He talked like a guy who'd been hit by every financial mistake and still had the bruises. One night he got an email from a woman in Ohio. She ran a halfway house for women leaving prison. "They don't trust anyone, but they trust you. You don't preach, you just speak." Vince stared at the screen for a long time, then hit reply. "Let me know if they want a live session." The next week, he was on a Zoom call with 12 women who asked better questions than any banker ever had. Malik's office was above a thrift store on 9th Street. It smelled of mothballs and fresh paint. The walls were lined with books on psychology, trauma recovery, and community healing. A small sign by the door read, "The Bridge, Community Mental Health and Repair." He didn't just offer therapy. He offered context, group sessions for formerly incarcerated youth, one-on-one coaching for people trying to reintegrate, family circles, restorative justice. People came through the door thinking they were broken. He reminded them they were still being shaped. In the hallway outside his office, he framed a single quote. "Justice isn't punishment. It's the space between damage and repair, CP." He never told anyone who wrote it, but it grounded the whole building. Rosa's exhibition opened in a proper gallery, this time big windows, champagne people who said things like visceral and brave with overpronounced R's. But she didn't care about the critics. She cared about the work. The series was called Portraits of the Forgiven. It wasn't about redemption. It was about aftermath. Each canvas was a study in contradiction, anger and grace, guilt and growth. One showed a man with shadowed eyes holding a plant sprouting from the center of his chest. Another a woman walking barefoot over broken glass, leaving flowers in her footprints. But the centerpiece was simple. Clara, sitting in profile writing, her eyes distant, a scar over her heart stitched with gold thread. When asked what it meant, Rosa answered, "It's a Japanese thing, Kintsugi. You fill the cracks with gold. You don't hide the break. You honor it." The painting sold in under an hour. Rosa donated the proceeds to the bridge. One Thursday afternoon, Clara returned from the market with a bag of lemons and a roll of stamps. The mail sat in a neat stack on the kitchen counter. Junk bills, a postcard from an old neighbor, and one small box, no return address. She opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of folded letters, each in a different handwriting. Some on ruled notebook paper, others typed. A few were drawings from children. At the bottom of the stack was a note scribbled in Vince's messy scrawl. "I told them you were the reason I learned how to teach. They wanted to thank you themselves." Clara sat down at the table. Hands trembling, she unfolded the first letter. "I was going to drop out, but your class made me feel like I wasn't stupid. Terrence, 17. Another. My dad's in prison for fraud. I didn't want to be him. Now I know how not to be. Thank you for forgiving someone like him. Because of you, I forgave him too." Another. "I thought no one cared about kids like us. But you did. Even if you never met me." Clara covered her mouth. The letters kept coming. A girl drew a piggy bank with wings and wrote, "Because of you, money doesn't scare me anymore." A mother scribbled in barely legible pen, "My son helped me budget for groceries for the first time. He said, Miss Clara would want us to know where every dollar goes." Clara's breath hitched. Her shoulders shook, and for the first time in many, many years she wept. Not from grief, not from rage, but from something deeper. Relief, a kind of peace that didn't ask permission. She wept for Martin, for the house on Trinity Street, for the woman she used to be, and for the new roots she'd found here in this small kitchen with dirt still under her nails and lemon in the air. Outside, the sun leaned over the horizon, gold spilling over the fence into the garden. She stood, gathered the letters gently, and placed them in a shoebox, then walked outside, bent over her seedlings, and smiled. The gymnasium was too small for the number of folding chairs they'd set up. Streamers hung from basketball hoops. Plastic flowers in paper vases lined the edge of the stage. A banner, clearly handmade, stretched from wall to wall above the crowd. Class of Resilience. Graduation ceremony. The audience was a mix of first-generation parents in borrowed suits, students in second-hand caps and gowns, and kids who looked like they'd fought their way to this day. They had. This wasn't a regular high school. This was a program for at-risk youth kids, failed by systems, written off by tests, suspended by people who never asked what happened at home. And now they were graduating. Every seat was full. The back row was pressed against the wall. In the middle of that row, quiet and unnoticed, sat Clara Prescott. She wore a gray shawl, her white hair pulled into a loose bun. No one recognized her. She liked it that way. Her name wasn't in the program, but she knew exactly why she was here. On stage, the principal, an energetic woman in her 40s, stepped to the mic. "Before we call up our students," she said, "we have one more voice to hear from." She paused, smiled at someone off stage. He taught many of these graduates how to think differently, not just about numbers, but about themselves. The audience applauded. "He's not a teacher by training. He's a teacher by transformation." She turned. "And if you've ever watched one of his online classes, you know why he's standing here today." A murmur swept the crowd. Vince stepped out from behind the curtain, black button down, no tie. A bracelet one of the students had made him green beads like growth. He didn't carry notes, just a folded paper in his back pocket and the weight of everything he'd been. He stood at the podium, waited. The applause died down. He scanned the crowd, a rows of kids who reminded him of himself before it all went wrong. And somewhere near the back, he couldn't see her, but he knew she was there. "My name is Vince Halperin," he began, voice steady. "Some of you know me from the videos, some from class. A few of you know me because I marked up your worksheets with red pen and didn't apologize for it." Laughter. "I wasn't always a teacher, Before you, I was something else." He paused, and then told them the truth. The real truth. About Atlanta. About the fake contracts, the offshore accounts the night he walked out of an office with another man's retirement savings in his briefcase. He told them about Martin Prescott, a name they'd never heard, and the woman whose silence had been louder than any courtroom. "I never saw a jail cell," he said. "But that doesn't mean I didn't live with a sentence." He swallowed hard. "Then one day someone who should have destroyed me gave me a job instead." His voice caught for half a second. "She didn't ask me to be perfect. She just asked me to be useful." He looked down. "I spent most of my life taking. But when someone gives you a second chance, you learn to build instead." He smiled gently. "You all know what that means. You built your own lives one brick at a time. Through chaos, through trauma, through no one showing up. And yet here you are." Applause began to build again. He held up a hand. "One more thing," he said, and pulled the folded paper from his back pocket. "This was something I wrote the night I was supposed to give up. I kept it with me, to remind me of what's possible." He unfolded it, took a breath, and read. "I was once a shadow. I hurt people I never met. I wore a suit like armor. I smiled while taking what wasn't mine. And then one woman chose to see what I could become instead of what I had been. She forgave, not for my sake, but because her strength refused to make hate a home. So if I've taught you anything, let it be this. You are not what you've done. You are what you're willing to fix. I was once the dark, but someone believed I could still create light." There was a pause. Then the entire room stood. Thunderous applause, cheers, tears. Some students clapped above their heads. Others cried openly. A grandmother wiped her eyes with a napkin from her purse. The principal held her heart in her hands. And at the very back, Clara stood silently. She didn't clap, didn't cry. She just nodded, like a gardener watching the seed finally break through the dirt. When the applause died and the ceremony ended, Vince stepped off the stage and was instantly surrounded. Students hugging him, teachers shaking his hand, a mother pressing a thank you note into his palm. He looked toward the back row, but the seat was empty. All that remained was a small piece of paper neatly folded resting on the cushion. He walked over, picked it up, opened it. In Clara's handwriting, strong and unflinching, it said, "Forgiveness does not erase justice, it completes it." He held the note to his chest and closed his eyes. Outside, Clara stepped into the golden late afternoon. The sun filtered through trees that lined the schoolyard, painting shadows that looked like stained glass. She walked slowly to her car. No fanfare, no goodbye. She had no need for spotlights. She'd already done what mattered. And now the world would carry the rest. As the screen fades to black, a line appears, inspired by true lives and quiet revolutions. Then another, based on fragments of forgiveness too quiet for the news, but loud enough to change someone forever. Then silence, and the faint sound of pages turning, as if somewhere someone kept writing,